Again, we are going to discuss with Jerry Gidel the USDA numbers and the new numbers from South America right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So, Jerry, how are you today? We're going to start with the USDA numbers. It sounds like nobody was surprised.
Sure seems that way, the way it reacted here today. From or this week, I should say, not today. Actually, we had a little bounce back finally in a couple markets after a couple days here. The actual reaction initially here was as expected with the reduction in the soybean side of things. But the real kicker on these numbers was the fact that the USDA's world stock numbers just didn't change dramatically. When you take out, in Argentina state here, they took off, I think it was 7 million in, excuse me, uh, in corn from 47 down to 40, and they took beans down 8 million from 41 to 33. And yet the carryover stocks actually in corn rose a little bit. Uh, Not much, but it did rise. And then the soybeans was down 2 million. And I think that once they started looking at all the numbers there, the initial short covering kind of waned. And then all of a sudden, with the numbers there not changing at the world numbers state, the buyers just put their stop in, and all of a sudden they were getting stopped out there by the close, and that kind of followed through the next day with the U.S. exports. Wow, soybeans. We actually had enough cancellations to compensate for what we sold, and so we didn't have an increase in U.S. exports for soybeans. Corn was fantastic at 55 million, but the combination of the 2 days here, it definitely kept things looking kind of surprisingly negative after really, I think, to some extent, the USDA's numbers were not too far off.
Yeah, so, well, in the meantime, in South America, the CONEP, the Brazilian agency, reduced the soybean crop, and the exchange in Argentina reduced the soybean crop also. So definitely there will be a reduced soybean production in Argentina. So,
The whole region down there, exactly right. The interesting thing is, even before the ink was dry here on the U.S. number here, uh, on 11 o'clock later that afternoon, Rosario, which had kind of put out something here earlier in the week, and that on expectations for their crop down there. They're the ones that really took a hammer to this thing. They went to 27 million on Rosario soybean numbers down there. And on the corn, they went from 41 down to 37. Now, that's not as low, that's below the USDA's 40 was just mentioned, and we're substantially lower than the USDA's 33 million on the Rosario numbers. From there, and so that's kind of right now, there's a lot of people saying, well, how can we get to these low numbers, and that we're going substantially below some of the 2017 numbers. We're not back to the 2007 and 8 numbers that were really touchy, but we're talking about more land being utilized down there. And at the twist of it is that even within the numbers that we're talking about here from Rosario, they're talking about significant reductions in the harvested area. And even within the USDA's numbers, they took 300, I think it was 300, no, it's 400,000 hectares out of that. And I think that's the second time in the last 2 months they did the same thing. And so that's how we can bring these numbers down. Now, boy, you're getting down to that 27 number. That's kind of that's going to be real interesting as to how that comes together here, because as we've talked in the past, soybeans have kind of an interesting ability to kind of hang on for rain. But I think the real twist this year on that whole scenario that has really come back right now when we're trying to put together these numbers is the fact, and what could happen on these things is the fact that we had a significant proportion of both corn and soybeans in Argentina that were planted after wheat because of the dryness that was going on even before the wheat harvest. And so that put a higher percentage of the crop being planted in the second planting window. And at the same time, that heat continued. And I think there was a situation here where we lost some plants and lost some potential during that late December and January period, when there usually isn't a crop can usually get up and kind of go and all this kind of stuff, and maybe even get it to the point in beans where it can kind of hang on for rain. But I'm not sure that happened down there, and we've had 2 months of reduction in harvested area, and that could easily be a big factor on pushing the beans down. They haven't really hit the corn harvested number from the USDA at this point, but that's kind of be interesting if that doesn't come up and become a factor here as we go forward here in April and May on some of these numbers. But wow, thinking as I just said here that these things have made some significant reductions, yet the world carryover stocks, basically it was the idea that, oh well, China's not going to use it, so and everybody's reducing their use because of high prices. That's going to be interesting. You can do a little bit of that, but I wonder if we're into the point where things could still tighten up pretty dramatically here. Because at this point, we're still one of the few places you can get access to corn, soybeans, and wheat. And that will be a factor as we go forward here. As to right now, there's even been some rumors late last week about Chinese interest, and they again surfaced again today.
Yes, and I don't want to skip another issue brought by Pro Farmer this week that was saying that in February, the month with the slower cattle export in the United States, how do you weigh the impact on grain and oil?
What imports did we reduce there?
Cattle exports.
Oh, cattle. Yeah, well, the cattle it's an interesting situation in China. They have really, the upper echelons of China have really got the taste of beef, and even around the world, because of the issues that are going on in Argentina, another big place of big beef exports to the world. Now they're grass-fed type approaches, but guess what? This kind of weather doesn't create a lot of pasture for those animals. So there's a chance that there might be actually some forced sales like there was in the US here for some exports in Argentina. But in the US, at least, there's still a dry spot, actually. That's one of the other contentions I have in this market is that, yes, California's got snow past the top of their trees, and Eastern Corn Belt and that area has got big moisture this winter. But the areas where wheat and hardwood wheat from western Nebraska all the way to the Texas Panhandle have not seen moisture. And yes, El Nino is on the way. La Nina is waning. We had another update on that today. But wow, that's how soon does it come? You know, right now, having May and June rains on the plains improve isn't going to help the wheat market. It's going to be long gone by that time. That's when harvest is, and that at this juncture, at least, it needs to show up next week, not 2 months from now. So that's the other twist of this thing that I don't know. It's hard to. The technicals aren't good, but right now some of these things that just don't seem to fit the things in front of us here,
Well,
particularly.
the U.S. pork producers are still holding their sales.
Yeah, the hog scenario is also tightening up, but we're into that interesting period here in the U.S. Where normally we see some seasonal increases in both hogs and beef in the April period, and that usually kind of sets the tone. But right now, the numbers aren't coming along in either one of these. In the beef, particular, they're trying at the best to try to hold these animals back to try to hopefully see this El Nino show up so they can end up building a beef herd. And at the same time, the hog numbers are still well, three. The USDA's recent numbers here had numbers down 2 or 3%. So right now it's beef and meats going ahead here on inflation and higher prices is one of those hotbed scenarios here at the grocery store. I guarantee you that in the U.S. As we go into the next 6 months. But there's no other way around it unless you can get some animals held back to make more animals. You're never going to get any more meat supply. So it's chicken of the egg deal on that thing. We're going to have to suffer through some higher beef prices. So buy yourself a freezer out there and throw some stuff in there, because I think you'll be well worth paying ahead and get some meat in the freezer. I know it's not a classic situation for many people around the world, but I've got a freezer that's half full. Looking for more.
Yeah, the butcher around the corner will not have seen his sales increase. But
He's already encouraging you to do the same thing. I'm glad to see that I'm not the only one pointing out that it's not going to change, folks. It's the biological world we're in here. If you want more, you got to hold back some females so you can have more. And unfortunately, that isn't it.
What are you seeing next week?
Well, it's going to be next week is going to be a couple different things here. We've got to see what the world does happen here on these negotiations by next weekend. By the tail end of it, there, 18th and 19th, we're supposed to have a deadline coming along here between the Ukrainians and the Russians on their Black Sea grain corridor. I still haven't seen a lot of connection going on here. The Ukrainians want a year's worth of extension. They also want to have another port included, and they'd like to end up having some more inspectors. Right now, the Russians have only said that they want less sanctions, which is, I'm not sure how that's really, they've talked about this issue off and on since it started, but somehow or other they're unable to get things out the door. So I don't know. They might have been able to get a few more things out the door, but at this point they're still ahead, and they had a big crop from last year. Now the other twist of that is the fact that I've heard commentary too about Russia's crop over there being hit by some winter kill already, 5 or 6%. I thought I saw a headline on that. And then the same situation, they just had a humongous lucky crop last year. Their probability of bringing it back towards the 80 to 85 million metric ton level for wheat and something less on corn, and that is logical along the way, because they've, other than this last year, they haven't been able to really get above that 80. We've had numbers down in the 70s recently too. So I don't know that I'd say that's logical for sure ahead of us, but that's part of the other factor. Of course, we're going to continue to see what seems to be coming out of South America. Even Buenos Aires put out a report here, I think it was late yesterday afternoon or this morning, that they reduced their numbers down. They're not as low as Rosario's, they're but below the USDA's numbers, and that's the whole thing involved here. We're going right at this point, we've had some very significant harvest progress, but Sassafras Mercado put out another number late this afternoon that their overall soybean harvest is around just a smidgen under 50%, where it's normally 60%. Now, so well, geez, if Mato Grosso is doing so well, what's going on? Well, the other part of this, as you mentioned earlier, is Paranon and issues in the south. Rio Grande is on the dry side, but Paranon's had issues of getting their harvest done because of the same moisture that was hitting up in Mato Grosso and that. And so that there is some double crop and some significance. I think it's about 15%, 12 to 15% of the corn crop in in Brazil is comes out of first crop, second crop scenarios out of Paraná, and that's also highly important for feeding situations down in Rio Grande. And so that's going to be another hot spot of watching what's going on here. Unfortunately, the heat situations and the impact on second crop corn is still probably at least 4 weeks and probably more like 6 weeks away. And that, and to see how impacting that is on the second crop safrinha corn in Brazil. But right now, the U.S. and the world is going to be looking at what's going on in the big negotiations there in the Black Sea, and what happens there is probably the big focus, along with what's going on, as I said, weather-wise around the world.
All right. Thank you very much, sir.
It's always good to talk, sir, and ended up big weekend of college basketball finishing up, and next week we start the big tournaments.